So you're working on a project, you're doing a mix, you're doing some recording, and you think to yourself, man, I wish this sounded like it was recorded by a boomer. I love digital recordings just as much as the next guy, but there's a reason why I think a lot of people kind of idolize analog gear and analog recording and why they have a certain sound. There's a lot of characteristics and there's a coolness factor from, you know, old tape and vinyl. There's a lot of good art oftentimes is imperfect, and with digital, sometimes it's hard to get that cool, imperfect kind of vibe that I feel a lot of people are going for. I don't think that you can ever get like the absolute perfect replication of that sound, but there's a lot of tips and tricks that you can do in recording in a digital age that can kind of get you closer to some of those same vibes. A few weeks ago, there was actually a cover that I did of Ain't No Sunshine by Mr. Bill Withers that I kind of wanted like an old school kind of vibe to make it kind of sound like it was recorded in like the 50s or the 60s, but also I wanted to include the good things that I can do with digital recording as far as stereo, cool effects, kind of stuff like that, while maintaining kind of like an old school vibe. And so I'm going to play a little bit of that. I'm going to have the link to the full thing in the description so you can see that.
Ain't no sunshine when she's gone. It's not home when she's away. Ain't no sunshine when she's gone, and she's always gone too long. Anytime she goes away.
That might not be exactly what you're looking for, but using some of these tips, these are things that you can use to get closer to a sound, to push that a little bit farther than maybe I did. So the first thing that I wanted to cover is warmth and distortion. It helps when you're stepping into recording anything, having an idea of the sound that you are going for. When you're thinking analog vintage, you're thinking tube preamps, old instruments, dead strings, old EQ compressors, all those types of things. And digital is great, but there's a certain sound in itself that we attribute to old recordings. Second thing is going to be filtering EQ. Old means of recording audio did not have the advantage of going 20 hertz to 20,000 hertz. It was much more in the middle. They didn't have the far low or the far right that we kind of hear in a lot of our recordings today. So it's important to kind of like filter in. You want to constrain the recordings that you've made to kind of fit the more so the profile that you're used to hearing from old recordings. Third thing is going to be compression to add color. That's a lot of things that people still do today, but there's a few things that you can do differently using modern digital compressors to get them closer to sound like the vintage one. Fourth one is going to be reverb / space. A lot of times these recordings were made in studios that had natural space. They did not have the ability to add in, for the most part, digital or fake reverbs. So a lot of times they would record in a space that was the physical manifestation of what they wanted it to sound like in a recording. I'll show you a good way that you can use to kind of fake that. The fifth one is going to be noise. If you're going for that old sound, it's not going to be perfect. You're going to want to add some imperfections in there. It sounds ridiculous, but it does make a difference. So now getting into the DAW. This is kind of breaks down all the things that I had in that cover. I've got my electric guitar, a lot of the percussion stuff. I did some claps and panned them around. I hit a box with my hand, and then I even just took my car keys and jingled them off my hand really close to the mic to kind of get like a chains kind of sound that I was looking for, like Delta blues. And so starting off with those things that we can talk about to get the warmth and the distortion that I wanted, I actually recorded my vocals for this cover using a cheap tube preamp with a very old tube in it that I bought from some dude on eBay. You might not have that, but I will show you a workaround. But the thing about it is that the workaround you do not put up front, you put that after everything else. So if you have a way of getting warmth, incorporate as much of that as you can early on as you are recording. And then right here I have my pitch correction. I'm going to spare you guys that. I'm going to leave that right on. I like to use a lot of proximity effects, so when I record my vocals, I like to get right up in there and feel the low end and do all that. High cut at about 11K. Normally I would have done that around 16 or 17, but again, we don't want all of the high end in there. So I'm going to kind of filter that to kind of get more of like a coffee, like a tin coffee can kind of sound. Moving into compression, my first compressor that I generally use, the threshold, I don't want it to hit the whole transient. Normally just kind of shave the top and bring it back down closer to something that's manageable, because I do not record with an analog compressor, not yet. I wish I had one. First one I normally do 8-to-1 ratio or 10-to-1 ratio, and I'll play a little bit of this singled out so you can kind of hear what we're dealing with here.
Ain't no sunshine when she's gone. Ain't no sunshine when she's gone. And she's always gone too long anytime.
So again, it's not pulling everything, just some of the higher transients, and I do want that to peak at around 10, have the median be maybe 7 decibels. And then for the second one, this is the one that I want to kind of ride it a little bit more, and then I added just a little bit. If I did not use the tube preamp to add some distortion and some warmth, I would be pushing this a lot harder, but I'm just having it soft just to add a little bit, and you'll see this kind of riding the vocals a little bit harder than the previous one, because this is the one that I'm using to get tone and get the in-your-face kind of sound that we want out of a lot of vocals.
Shine when she's gone, and this house just ain't a home anytime she goes away.
I want that one kind of a medium attack, medium release, but I want that to be riding the vocal, usually around -5 dB for most of the song. And then right here, this is where you're going to have your workaround. If you don't have a tube preamp or anything like that, honestly, I like this plugin for most of my vocals if I just want a cool kind of sound that I'm not getting. This is an amazing plugin. This is called the Saturation Knob by Soft Tube. It is free. You can download it right now for free. You should download it because it's free. Basically what this does is it introduces an emulated tube distortion. Now, I already have a lot of warmth on my voice because I did use the tube pre, but I'll show you what this does by kind of blending it in as it's playing here.
And this house just ain't a home anytime she goes on. And this house just ain't a home anytime.
Obviously that's more than you'd want, but if you put it in a mix just to add some warmth, tone it back a little bit.
And this house just ain't a home anytime.
It sounds great. It's hard to mess up with this thing. So the next thing I did is I added 2 reverbs to the main vocal. The first one I added right here in my bus 1. This is kind of what I wanted to be the overall room sound of all the instruments. You can notice down here I have all of the instruments pretty much going into that, and pretty heavily. And this one I just have an old vintage reverb. Again, I have the vocals soloed out so you can hear just the voice going into that.
Ain't no sunshine when she's gone, and this house just ain't a home anytime she goes away.
It's not crazy over the top. It's just kind of a nice haul. Again, the idea is to make it sound like everything in the mix is it's existing inside the same space. So the second reverb I have on here, I'll turn it on to single that one out. I just have the vocals going through, and this is the sound of like an old spring reverb inside of an amp, and I'll give you a little bit of that. It is like an old way of creating sound of a fake space using a spring that they put in a lot of guitar amps. You can hear it here.
Shine when she's gone, and this house just ain't a home anytime.
So you can hear that kind of ring out. You get that a lot in old recordings. You will hear kind of that spring tone in there a lot of times, and that's something that I really kind of wanted to sell the effect. And then along here, something that I really like with some old recordings, especially like old gospel and stuff like that, is they'll have like group vocals just kind of doing hums and oohs and ahs and stuff that I wanted in this, again, just for the style of this cover. I pulled some of the highs out of that even more just to kind of push them back farther into the mix.
Wonder this time
and then moving on to the acoustic, again, the big thing you want to do is add warmth, filter EQ, compression for color, reverb, space. This one I recorded finger picking. I placed the mic on my guitar to make it sound even deader than it was. EQ. This is just kind of my standard EQ that I normally do for acoustics, actually, except I pushed the high end way, way back. Normally on acoustics, I would probably have this at like 12K or just off. If I want really nice kind of high end sparkle with the pick and stuff like that, I will turn it off and then play a little bit and then turn it on so you can hear it. It sounds dead, but sometimes that's what you want. And then the compression on this one, I normally do not compress my acoustics as hard as I did this one. This one I did 3-to-1 tack, real fast, slow release. You can hear it here. It's not Again, you don't want to nerf it, but you want to more so get the sound of the body, because I feel like a lot of the old acoustic guitar recordings do not have any of that sparkle, and so that's something I just wanted to cut out of there. And then a lot of the percussion, I just kind of drowned in the sound of the room itself. You can hear some of that here. She's going to stay. Cut out some of the high, just kind of find that pocket for a lot of the things to exist in. Again, filtering out EQ. And then for my electric here, I basically, I just plugged straight into the Logic using my interface and used kind of like an old, I think it was like a Fender emulation they had here in the DAW. And then for my EQ, I cut it all the way back to 6. Again, I want to get rid of all that sparkle. I actually recorded it. I have a 1962 Gibson hollow body with a little single coil pickup on it. Again, not everybody's going to have something like that, but the reason why I have that guitar is specifically for this kind of sound. I like the way it sounds. That's why I haven't gotten rid of it. It is very unique. You can do some effects and stuff to kind of help it along, but again, the closest you can get to your finished product, closer to the source. In other words, if I want a dull sounding acoustic in a recording, then I better use a dead sounding acoustic with dead old strings on it. You're going to have a much easier time just starting at the source, and you're going to have a much better finished result if you just go that way. The last thing that I have, a lot of old recordings, a lot of old microphones have a very high noise floor. And a lot of the old records, even when you hit them to play and they spin on the thing, you can just hear them and dust and everything like that. That's something that you do not have in the digital age, unless you just have a really crappy microphone. Then you might. But something that I've found kind of helps to sell. Again, you don't want to go overboard. But something that I've found kind of helps to sell the effect of an old style recording is introducing noise. And so literally I just went online, I downloaded this sound of a record vinyl hiss of the needle going around and collecting dust and that kind of thing that I put throughout the whole song. You can hear it here. First time I've seen this used was in a lot of lo-fi hip-hop tracks. I just thought it was cool. It kind of had old school vibes, and I liked the sound, and I was kind of looking for an excuse to have a similar kind of vibe in a cover, which is why I threw it in there. So you just kind of want to take that and mix it into the song to add flavor. You don't want it to be overpowering. She's going to stay. Ain't no sunshine when she's gone, and this house just ain't a home anytime she goes away. And so, that's pretty much it. Again, the 5 things you want to keep in mind: warmth / distortion. A lot of that's going to be on the front end. Filtering the EQ, adding compression to color, reverb, and creating space, and introducing some noise and some imperfections to your recording. I hope that helps. I hope it inspires you to maybe take some risks and try some things in recording that maybe you wouldn't have, like jingle some keys in front of a microphone or something weird like that. Otherwise, if maybe you know more about recording than me and you saw something totally janky about my settings on my compressors or something like that, just let me know. I promise I'm always striving to be a lifelong student of something like this. I don't think that somebody ever arrives as a musician or arrives as a mixing engineer. If this video helped you, if you could do me a favor and just like the video and maybe even subscribe. I'm gonna plan on doing more videos like this in the future as well as my covers. So thanks guys, hope you have a good one.